This is the Richmond Artifex. Nicely rounded spine, nicely rounded heel, nice transition from handle to blade in this area. On the negative, squarish in the top of the handles, tang crowned over the slabs, end of the handle relatively sharp. Those three issues though were easily fixed with some sandpaper. Very nice distal taper on the blade. Edges around 20 thousandths thick. Ran up to 5 thousandths at the tip. Initially I thought that was intentional. They were doing it to provide versatility in the blade shape. Turns out it was just sloppy grinding. I've talked to a bunch of people who had the same knife. The variances that I've seen and the variances that they'd seen along the blade, it's just essentially random scatter. The tip is probably thinner than the heel, but how much varies from blade to blade. On the negative, the blade was burnt in the tip on the leading edge, and it came with zero slicing aggression. Could barely cut a tomato, and you could in fact rake it back and forth over your hand with no danger of cutting yourself. Did some edge retention runs with the edge bevel reset to a lower angle, 10 degrees per side, with a true micro bevel of around 12 to 14 degrees per side. The edge retention was relatively low. It started off as a type 1 class steel like this, Chicago cutlery, 420J2, moderate sort of hardness. Second run moved up to sort of matching this, Henkel's Twin Master, slightly higher, harder steel, slightly more carbide volume, improved hardening. They use an extended quench. In particular, they use dry ice, I assume because it says ice hardened on it. Third run, it was able to match the performance of VG10 and was by now a type 2 class steel. But M390 should be a type 3 class steel. It should be much more abrasion resistant than VG10. So for cutting cardboards, it should be able to hold a lower sharpness much longer. But like I said, at best, after 3 runs, it could only match VG10. On the downside, it was extremely difficult to grind and relatively difficult to sharpen. In particular, I started off using a relatively cheap stone. It was taking between 500 to 1,000 passes per side to reset the bevel after the cardboard runs, and pieces were coming out of the edge, indicating of course that the stone didn't have the ability to cut the steel, which is a combination of this is not a great stone in regards to cutting ability, but the edge itself is weak and it's not keeping the carbides in. Switching to 1,000 grit King Waterstone, same thing, 500 to 1,000 passes per side. That's a tremendous amount of grinding to reset the edge. It did stop the carbide tear out problem I was having though. And in comparison, these knives, even the VG10 one, take around 25 to 50 passes per side at maximum to reset the bevel. So 25 to 50 passes per side, 50 to 500 to 1,000 passes per side, so dramatic difference. The other thing as well, the edge retention was completely random in that any given run it could blunt by rolling or it could blunt by chipping, and I would take that basically as I'm still in steel that's been overheated and damaged. So what I'm seeing is damage to the microstructure, which can be weakening or fracture depending on how exactly it was ground and the quenching, water dipping that people do unfortunately after overheating the blade, and how much of the cracks intersect the edge and how much of the weakened spots intersect the edge, and so that will be kind of random in nature. So overall, very difficult steel to grind, and when I mean difficult to sharpen, the edge would burr trivially, even using clean, flat stones with ultra light force. It was impossible to get the edge to form clean at around 10 degrees per side. I had to go up to a relatively heavy micro bevel, and as soon as I tried to make that a true micro bevel by back sharpening, the burr would form again immediately, and that's not a good sign. It shows that the steel is very weak, and again, that's reflected in the relatively poor edge retention. I was doing runs with the edge finished on a 600 grit DMT stone, not because that's overly optimal for a chef's knife. It's just a stone that I picked to do edge retention runs because in general that gives me a rather nice balance of push cutting and slicing aggression. But for kitchen knives, you're better off with a higher finish in general, because 600 DMT is that rough. You can feel it when you're pushing through potatoes, those teeth having to push through and break up the material. Although it's wonderful on a bread and carving knife because it's very aggressive on a slice. I would argue in general though you're probably better off with something like this. This is a 4000 grit DMT. It's their new 6 micron medium extra fine stone, and I'll probably use this as the actual working finish when I'm not doing stock cutting. Now this blade has been completely reground. Like I said, it had a 10 degree per side edge bevel, which left the edge at around 21 to 22 thousandths thick. It's just over half a millimeter. That's way too durable of an edge for a kitchen knife that's not a cleaver. My chopping knives are even lower thickness than that. So I regrounded, keeping the full convex taper, so it tapers towards the spine and tapers towards the edge, and it goes from around 4 thousandths to 2 thousandths thick from heel to tip. So I'm going to lay off the edge retention work for a while now, just use it in the kitchen after I finish up with some other knives. Put some wear on it, some sharpening, just get a feel for how it works balance wise, cutting wise, belly wise in terms of curvature, get a feel for the tip in regards to the penetration ability, slicing ability, balance of that in regards to toughness and strength and all those kind of good things. And then after using it for a while, come back and, like I said, see if I'm in quality steel. I really don't believe what I'm seeing here is an indication of M390. Because again, M390 is one of the newer generation powdered metallurgy steels. It should obviously perform much better than this. It shouldn't just be able to match the performance of VG10 on abrasive cutting, and it shouldn't have all these issues with grinding and ease of sharpening. Now yes, the grindability is much lower than VG10, but it's not 20 times lower, which is what I was seeing.